Welcome to Poirot Stories, dear listeners. I'm Preston Flint, your guide through the intricate webs of mystery spun by the incomparable Hercule Poirot. Tonight, we embark on a tale of intrigue, deception, and the little grey cells at work. Hercule Poirot and the unsolved crime death. Settle in with a cup of tea, or perhaps something stronger, as we transport you to the fog-shrouded estates of 1920s England. This is a long one, perfect for those cosy evenings, so make yourself comfortable. Chapter 1. The Letter from Shadowbrook Manor. The fog of London in late October clung to the streets like a guilty conscience. It seeped beneath collars, blurred the gas lamps into halos of gold, and turned the Thames into a ribbon of molten pewter. In a modest but impeccably ordered apartment on the third floor of Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat at his walnut writing desk, a single green-shaded lamp casting a pool of light over his morning correspondence. He was a small man, neat as a pin, with a head shaped rather like an egg and a moustache so magnificently waxed that it seemed to have a life of its own. At present, it twitched ever so slightly as he slit open the final envelope of the post. The paper was heavy, cream-coloured, and embossed with a crest, a stag rampant beneath a crown of ivy. The handwriting within was bold, impatient, the ink still faintly fragrant with sandalwood. Poirot folded the letter with geometric precision, his green eyes narrowing. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured. "The English aristocracy. They invite one to tea and serve murder on the side." From the adjoining room came the rustle of a newspaper. Captain Arthur Hastings, tall, broad-shouldered, with the earnest face of a public schoolboy who had never quite grown out of cricket, poked his head around the door. "I say, Poirot, you're looking positively thunderous. Bad news? Non, Hastings, an invitation to a country house. In England, this is never merely social. It is a summons to chaos." Hastings grinned. "Jolly good. I've been dying for a bit of fresh air. Shall I pack the +4s? Poirot sighed theatrically. "You will pack your brain, mon ami. That is all I ask, though I fear even that may be too much to hope for." Friday arrived draped in drizzle. The 317 from Paddington was a cathedral of mahogany and brass, its compartments smelling of coal smoke, wet wool, and the faint perfume of ambition. Poirot and Hastings shared a first-class carriage with a dowager in mourning black and a young clerk who kept sneaking glances at Poirot's moustache as if it were a museum piece. As the train steamed north through the home counties, the city gave way to hedgerows and church spires. Poirot gazed out at the passing villages, each with its duck pond, its war memorial, its secrets, and spoke softly. "You see, Hastings, the English countryside is a deception. It appears sleepy, pastoral. But beneath the thatch and the roses, the passions are as fierce as in any Parisian quartier. Jealousy, greed, revenge. They do not need neon lights to thrive." Hastings chuckled. "You make it sound like we're heading into a lion's den." "Precisely," said Poirot. "Only the lions wear tweed." At Bishop's Stortford, a gleaming silver Rolls-Royce Phantom II awaited, its chauffeur stiff-backed in bottle-green livery. The drive to Shadowbrook Manor wound through lanes so narrow the hedgerows scraped the paint. Finally, the car crested a hill, and the estate revealed itself like a stage set. Shadowbrook Manor was Tudor grandeur, wrapped in ivy and melancholy. Its chimneys spiralled into the low sky, its mullioned windows glinted like watchful eyes. The gravel drive crunched beneath the tyres as they approached the porte cochere, where a butler, tall, cadaverous, with the stillness of a graveyard statue, stood ready. "Welcome to Shadowbrook, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he intoned. "His lordship is expecting you." Inside, the air was thick with beeswax, wood smoke, and the faint tang of old money. The entrance hall soared 2 stories, its oak beams blackened by centuries of hearth fires. A suit of armour stood sentinel beside a grandfather clock that ticked with the solemnity of a judge. Portraits glared down, Harrington ancestors with hawk noses and eyes that followed you like accusations. Lord Reginald Harrington emerged from the drawing-room, a man in his mid-50s, tall and lean, with the posture of a cavalry officer and the pallor of someone who had not slept well in weeks. His handshake was firm, but his eyes, storm-grey and restless, betrayed him. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice low, "you cannot know how relieved I am to see you. And Captain Hastings, delighted. Come, let me introduce the others. We are a small party, but complicated." The drawing-room was a symphony of crimson velvet and gilt. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. Around it, the guests stood or sat in attitudes of studied nonchalance. Poirot bowed to each in turn, his gaze cataloguing details. The tremor in Lady Evelyn's left hand, the mud on Colonel Blackwood's boots. Fresh, despite the dry weather, the faint scent of gardenias clinging to Miss Voss's wrist. Lord Harrington clapped for attention. "Dinner at 8. Until then, please, make yourselves at home. Jenkins will show you to your rooms." Poirot's guest chamber was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the rose garden, now a tangle of bare thorns under the drizzle. The room was luxurious but oppressive. Heavy brocade curtains, a 4-poster bed that could have slept a rugby team, and a fireplace where the logs hissed like conspirators. Hastings flung himself into an armchair. "Well, Poirot, what do you make of our little menagerie?" Poirot removed his hat, smoothed his hair, and began to unpack with the reverence of a priest preparing the altar. "Observe, Hastings. Lord Harrington is afraid, terrified. His letter spoke of threats, but his eyes speak of guilt. Lady Evelyn is medicated. See the dilation of her pupils? Laudanum, perhaps. The Colonel is angry. The doctor is watchful. The nephew is desperate. The heiress is intriguing. And Mrs. Langford, she hates her brother with a passion that could curdle milk." Poirot paused, a silk handkerchief in hand, a phrase with weight. "In French, we say le crime mort, a death that is also a crime, unsolved, festering. I have heard whispers. A wartime scandal, 1917, a locked bunker in France, a soldier found stabbed, the door barred from within, ruled suicide, but the whispers never ceased." He folded the handkerchief into a perfect square. "Tonight we dine, tomorrow perhaps we dig." Dinner was a masterpiece of English cuisine and English restraint. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The table groaned under silver domes. Consommé sole meunière, roast pheasant with bread sauce, a charlotte russe that wobbled like a guilty secret. The wine was a 09 Chateau Margaux. Poirot sipped, nodded approval, but his eyes never left the faces around him. Poirot said nothing, but his gaze flicked to the dagger on the wall, a ceremonial piece, Indian, its hilt encrusted with rubies. It hung directly above Lord Harrington's chair. After dinner, the ladies withdrew. The men lingered over port and cigars. Lord Harrington leaned close to Poirot. "The letters began 3 weeks ago," he whispered, "typed, no signature. You will pay for the crime death. Justice delayed is justice denied. I burned the first 2, but the third—" He slipped a folded sheet into Poirot's hand. Poirot unfolded it beneath the table. The message was stark. Poirot's moustache bristled. You will lock your study door tonight, my lord, and you will not open it for anyone." Harrington nodded, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. Later, in the corridor outside Poirot's room, Hastings whispered, "Do you think he'll be safe?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the gaslight. "Safe? No, Hastings, but observed, that is another matter." He glanced down the hallway. A shadow moved, swift, silent, near the study door. Then vanished. Poirot smiled, a small cat-like smile. The game, mon ami, has already begun. Outside, the storm gathered. Thunder rolled over the Hertfordshire hills like the drums of war. And in the great house of Shadowbrook, every soul carried a secret sharp enough to kill. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Study. Each chime reverberated through the oak-panelled corridors, through the heavy velvet drapes, through the very bones of the house. Outside, the storm had arrived in full fury. Rain lashed the leaded windows like thrown gravel. Wind howled in the chimneys like a beast denied entry. The electricity flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, trembling shadows that danced across ancestral portraits. Hercule Poirot lay fully dressed upon his four-poster bed, eyes wide open, hands folded across his chest like a marble effigy. He had not undressed. He had not even removed his patent leather shoes. Sleep, for Poirot, was a luxury reserved for the innocent, and tonight, innocence was in short supply. Captain Hastings, in the adjoining room, snored softly, one arm flung over the side of the bed, his golf clubs propped in the corner like silent sentinels. Poirot envied him that untroubled slumber. But then Hastings had not seen the shadow in the corridor. Hastings had not read the final anonymous note slipped beneath Lord Harrington's door at 11:47 p.m. A note Poirot had intercepted and memorized. Poirot had returned the note to its envelope, sealed it with a dab of his own pomade to detect tampering, and left it on the hall table. Then he had waited and listened. Poirot rose now, silent as a cat. He donned his dressing gown of midnight blue silk, slipped a small electric torch into his pocket, and stepped into the corridor. The house was a tomb. The gas sconces had been turned low, their flames guttered in the draught. Somewhere a shutter banged. Somewhere else a floorboard sighed. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, avoiding the creaking third step, the loose runner near the suit of armour. He reached the main landing and paused. Below, in the entrance hall, a single candle burned on the console table. Its flame bent toward the study door, as if drawn by an unseen breath. The door was closed, locked, Poirot knew. Lord Harrington had promised to bolt it from within after their port. Poirot descended the grand staircase, each step measured. The storm outside crescendoed. Thunder cracked like a rifle shot, lightning bleaching the hall white for an instant. In that flash, Poirot saw it. A wet footprint on the parquet, leading from the study door toward the servants' corridor. Small, barefoot, the toe pointed away from the study. Poirot was already moving. He reached the study door in 3 strides. It was oak, iron-bound, the lock a heavy Yale. The key was in the lock, on the inside. He rattled the handle, solid, no give, from within sobbing, frantic. Then Lady Evelyn's voice muffled, "Help! Someone! Help the door! It won't open!" Footsteps thundered from above. Hastings burst onto the landing in striped pyjamas, hair wild. "Poirot! What the devil? Vite! The study!" Colonel Blackwood appeared next, in a dressing gown of regimental scarlet, a Webley revolver in his hand. "Stand back!" he barked. He fired once into the lock. Bang! The report deafening in the confined space. Wood splintered. The door shuddered but held. Dr. Thorne arrived, spectacles askew, medical bag swinging. "Let me! Pulse! Shock! No time!" Poirot snapped. "Together! Maintenant! On 3! Un, deux! Trois!" The men threw their shoulders against the door. It gave with a groan of tortured oak, swinging inward on screaming hinges. The study was a tableau of horror, frozen in candlelight. Lord Reginald Harrington lay slumped across his desk, face down, arms flung wide as if in supplication. A dagger, the Indian ceremonial blade from the dining-room wall, protruded from his back, buried to the hilt between the shoulder blades. Blood had soaked through his dinner jacket, pooling on the green leather blotter, dripping in slow, viscous drops onto the Persian rug. The metallic smell was overpowering. Lady Evelyn stood behind the desk, both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Her silk nightgown was spattered with crimson. She swayed, then crumpled to her knees. Hastings whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, it's impossible. The door was locked, the windows—" "Impossible," Poirot echoed, eyes glittering, "is merely a word for what has not yet been explained." He knelt beside the body. The dagger's hilt was warm, recent. The angle of entry, downward slightly to the left. A strong, practiced thrust. The victim had been standing, perhaps writing, when struck. Dr. Thorne knelt opposite, fingers at the carotid. "Dead less than 10 minutes, rigour yet to set in." Colonel Blackwood's revolver trembled. "I heard nothing until the scream. My room's directly above." Miss Voss appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a kimono, Geoffrey hovering behind her. "What's happened? We heard a shot." "Stay back!" Blackwood roared. Mrs. Langford arrived last, black dressing gown clutched tight. Her eyes flicked to the body, then away. "Reginald, my brother." Poirot rose. "Mesdames et messieurs, no one leaves this room until I say. Inspector Japp will arrive at dawn. Until then, Poirot is in charge." He turned to Lady Evelyn, now supported by Hastings. "Madam, you were first on the scene?" She nodded, trembling. I couldn't sleep. The storm. I came to check on Reginald. He often worked late. The door was locked. I knocked. No answer. Then I smelled blood. I pushed. Somehow the key turned from inside. I don't know how. Then I saw—" Poirot's gaze was gentle but relentless. "You entered alone?" "Yes. I screamed. Then you came." He stepped into the corridor. The wet footprint had already begun to evaporate, but a faint trail led toward the servants' staircase, then vanished on the stone steps. Poirot returned. "Dr. Thorne, the wound. Could it be self-inflicted?" Thorne shook his head. "Angle's wrong, and the force impossible from behind." Hastings: "Then how did the killer enter and leave a locked room?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "That, mon ami, is the question. But observe. The wire, the pearl, the footprint, the key. And the scent of gardenias. Yet Miss Voss wears rose de maille tonight, not gardenias." Miss Voss gasped. I changed perfumes after dinner. Someone else." Colonel Blackwood growled. "This is wartime trickery. Secret passages. I'll search—" "Non," Poirot said sharply. "Touch nothing. The room is a puzzle box. Every dust mote is a clue." He moved to the desk. The blotter held a typed letter. Half finished, the sentence ended in a smear of blood. Poirot's torch lingered on the typewriter. A Remington portable, cover open. A sheet of plain paper was still in the carriage. He pressed a key. Clack! The ribbon was fresh. The typeface matched the anonymous notes. Thunder crashed. The lights flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room. A collective gasp. Then a soft thump from the corridor. Poirot's torch snapped on. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a figure in black darting toward the servants' stairs. Gone in an instant. They ran. The staircase was empty. But on the stone floor, a single gardenia petal, wilting, wet with rain. Poirot picked it up, sniffed. From the conservatory. Someone was outside in the storm and entered through the scullery. Hastings. But the study windows were latched. Were they? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or were they latched after? Back in the study, the group stood in a tense semicircle. Poirot addressed them. Lord Harrington was murdered between 11:55 and 12:05. The door was locked from within. The key is inside, yet a footprint leads out. A wire was cut. A pearl is broken. A petal is dropped. And someone in this house, knows the truth of the crime death. He paused, letting the silence stretch like a wire. Tomorrow, we begin. Tonight, we watch. No one is alone. Pair up. Hastings with me, Colonel with Dr. Thorne, Geoffrey with Miss Voss, Lady Evelyn with Mrs. Langford. Mrs. Langford sneered. You think one of us, I think, Poirot said softly, that the past has returned to Shadowbrook, and it is very angry. The candle in the hall guttered and died. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The first pale blade of dawn sliced through the storm clouds at 6:47 a.m., revealing Shadowbrook Manor sodden and sullen, its ivy dripping like black blood. The rain had softened to a mournful drizzle, but the wind still prowled the eaves, rattling windows and sighing through keyholes, as if the house itself were exhaling secrets it had held for centuries. Hercule Poirot stood at the study window, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette small but immovable against the grey light. He had not slept. His patent leather shoes gleamed, his tie was knotted with geometric perfection, his moustache bristled with the alertness of a terrier scenting a rat. The room behind him remained untouched. The body of Lord Reginald Harrington still slumped across the desk, the dagger jutting like an accusation, the blood congealed into a dark mirror on the blotter. Captain Hastings hovered near the door, bleary-eyed, a cup of tea cooling in his hand. Inspector Japp's train was delayed by flooding on the line. He'll be here by 9, the station-master said. Poirot did not turn. 9 is too late, mon ami. The murderer does not wait for the convenience of Scotland Yard. Already the footprints fade, the petal wilts, the wire is coiled away in someone's pocket. We begin now. He pivoted on his heel, green eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a lighthouse beam. Observe the stage, Hastings. The locked door, the latched windows, the key turned wrong, the cut wire, the gardenia petal, and, he gestured to the typewriter, a confession begun but never finished. This is not merely murder. This is theatre. A soft knock. Jenkins, the butler, entered, his cadaverous face paler than usual. Begging your pardon, sir. The staff are assembled in the servants' hall as you requested, and the telephone lines are down. Storm damage. Poirot's moustache twitched. Natural element. The murderer is thorough. No communication with the outside world until Japp arrives. We are marooned with our killer. He strode into the corridor. The wet footprint had vanished entirely, but Poirot knelt anyway, running a gloved finger along the parquet. Still damp beneath the surface, the trail led to the scullery. We will follow it, after we speak to the living-izer. The servants' hall was a cavern of whitewashed stone, smelling of coal, carbolic, and fear. 8 staff stood in a nervous semicircle. Jenkins, Mrs. Potts, the cook, flour still on her apron. 2 housemaids, a boot boy, the chauffeur, the gardener, Mr. Diggs, and a scullery maid whose hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her cap. Poirot addressed them in his precise, accented English. Mesdames et messieurs, a crime most grave has been committed. You will answer truthfully, or you will answer to the law. Who was awake after 11 last night? Mrs. Potts stepped forward, chin high. I was, sir. Couldn't sleep with the storm. Heard footsteps in the back passage, light ones like a woman's, around midnight. Thought it was Lady Evelyn walking in her sleep again." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Again?" the cook nodded. "She's done it since the war. Finds her way to the conservatory, poor lamb. Talks to the flowers." Jenkins cleared his throat. "I locked the scullery door at 10, as always. Found it unlatched this morning, mud on the tiles." The gardener Diggs, a weathered man with soil under his nails, spoke up. "Gardenia bush by the scullery window was trampled, sir. Petals torn off. Someone went out and in through the side path." Poirot filed every detail. "And the conservatory key?" "Kept on a hook by the kitchen door," Jenkins said. "Missing since yesterday." Poirot dismissed the staff with a nod. "Return to your duties. Speak to no one." In the entrance hall, the suspects had gathered under the watchful eye of Colonel Blackwood, who stood with his revolver like a sentinel. The group looked as if they'd aged a decade overnight. Lady Evelyn sat on a settle, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, her face the colour of parchment. Dr. Thorne pressed a glass of brandy into her hand. "For the shock," he murmured. Mrs. Langford stood apart, arms folded, lips thin. "We should cover him at least. It's indecent." "No," Poirot said sharply. "The body remains until Japp sees it, exactement as we found it." Geoffrey Harrington paced, cigarette trembling between his fingers. "This is madness. Uncle was alive at 11:30. I saw him go into the study." Miss Voss, pale but composed, asked, "Did anyone hear anything? A struggle?" Hastings shook his head. "Only the scream." Poirot clapped his hands once, crack, silencing the room. "I say, we will now reconstruct the timeline. Each of you will account for your movements from 11 p.m. to 12:15. Précisément. Hastings, take notes." He began with Lady Evelyn. "I retired at 10:30, she said, voice faint. "Took my laudanum. Dr. Thorne prescribes it for my nerves. I woke at 11:50, heard the study door close, thought it was Reginald, went back to sleep. Then the smell of blood woke me. I don't know how I got in." "Poirot, you said the key turned from inside. Describe it." She closed her eyes. "I pushed. The handle turned. The key was already in the lock. It shouldn't have opened from outside." Next, Colonel Blackwood. "Port with Harrington till 11:20. He was agitated, kept glancing at the dagger on the wall, said, 'Some debts can't be paid with money.' I went to my room, read the Times, heard the scream." "Poirot, your revolver, was it loaded?" Blackwood bristled. "Always. Habit." Dr. Thorne. "I checked on Lady Evelyn at 10:45, gave her drops, retired, read medical journals, heard nothing until the scream." Mrs. Langford. "I was in the library, writing letters. Heard Geoffrey and Miss Voss arguing in the billiard room at 11:15. Went to bed at 11:30. My room is above the study. I heard nothing." Geoffrey. "Clara and I played billiards till 11:10. She went to her room. I smoked a cigarette in the conservatory. Door was open, saw a light in the study window, went to bed." Miss Voss. "I left Geoffrey at 11:10, went to my room, read Vogue, heard the study door at 11:55, thought it was Lord Harrington." Poirot's gaze lingered on her. "You changed perfume after dinner?" She flushed. "Yes, from gardenia to rose. Someone must have taken my old bottle." Poirot led the group back to the study. The body had been covered with a sheet at Dr. Thorne's insistence, but the dagger's outline was stark. "Now," Poirot said, "we examine the impossible." He pointed to the door. "Locked from within, key on the inside, yet Lady Evelyn entered from outside. How? Hastings, secret panel?" Poirot tapped the oak. Solid. He moved to the windows, latched, but aha! The left latch showed fresh scratches. "Someone forced it from outside, then relatched it. But the storm would have soaked the sill. It is dry." He knelt by the fireplace, cold, but soot on the hearth, fresh. Someone climbed down the chimney. No, too narrow, but up. The group watched, transfixed, as Poirot produced a magnifying glass. He examined the wire and bell. Cut with a scalpel. Dr. Thorne, your bag. Thorne opened it. A scalpel was missing. Poirot moved to the desk. The half-burned letter. He carefully extracted it with tweezers. The fragment now readable in full. Sergeant Elias Crowe did not hang himself in that bunker. He was stabbed to silence him. Harrington gave the order. Blackwood held him. My husband tried to stop it. They let him die of guilt. I have proof. Tonight, I confront. The signature was burned away. Mrs. Langford gasped. That's my husband's handwriting from 1917. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The crime death was murder, covered up, and someone in this room was there. He opened the desk drawer. Inside, a photograph. 5 soldiers in a trench. Harrington, Blackwood, a younger Dr. Thorne, a man with Mrs. Langford's eyes, her husband, and a sergeant with a hangdog face, Elias Crowe. On the back, in faded ink, for Reggie, lest we forget, E.C. Geoffrey snatched it. Uncle kept this, after what he did. Miss Voss whispered, Crowe? My mother's maiden name was Crowe. He was my great-uncle. Silence fell like a guillotine. Poirot broke it. The past has returned, but the murder weapon, he gestured to the dagger, was on the dining-room wall. Who could reach it? All eyes turned to the empty space above the sideboard in the hall. The dagger's outline was clear in the dust. Jenkins appeared. Sir, the conservatory door was forced. Mud matches the study windowsill. Poirot strode to the conservatory, a glass cathedral of ferns and orchids, the air humid, scented with earth and blooms. The gardenia bush was indeed trampled. A woman's shoe print, small, heeled, in the mud, Lady Evelyn's size. But her shoes were in her room. Dry, Poirot knelt. Beside the print, a torn scrap of black lace, from a mourning veil. Chapter 4. Clues and red herrings. The morning dragged on like a funeral procession, each minute heavy with suspicion. By 9:30, the storm had settled into a steady drumming rain that blurred the world beyond the manor's windows into a watercolour of greys. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool, cold tea, and the coppery ghost of blood that no amount of lavender polish could erase. Hercule Poirot had turned the drawing-room into his command post. The heavy mahogany table now served as an evidence board. The half-burned letter laid flat beneath a crystal paperweight, the gardenia petal in a saucer, the cut wire coiled like a sleeping snake, the photograph of the 5 soldiers propped against a silver candlestick, the torn scrap of black lace folded into a neat square. At the centre, the key from the study door, its bows still turned outward in defiant impossibility. Poirot stood before the assembly like a conductor, before a discordant orchestra. The suspects sat in a tense semicircle, each in their assigned chair as if pinned there by invisible tacks. Colonel Blackwood's revolver lay on a side table, unloaded now, at Poirot's insistence, but still menacing. Hastings stood behind Poirot, notebook open, pencil poised. Jenkins hovered by the door, ready to fetch whatever was required. Poirot began without preamble. We proceed méthodiquement. We have a locked room, a dagger from the dining room, a confession interrupted, and a trail that begins in mud and ends in mystery. We will now follow every thread, even the red ones. He picked up the gardenia petal. This came from the conservatory bush. Trampled, torn. Someone went out into the storm and returned soaked. Yet no one in this room is wet. Conclusion: the killer changed clothes. We search every wardrobe. Colonel Blackwood bristled. Dash it, man! You'll not pour through my kit." Poirot's smile was thin. "Then you will do it yourself, Colonel, under my supervision. Tout de suite." The Colonel's chamber smelled of pipe tobacco and gun oil. His uniform hung in the wardrobe like a ghost of empire. Poirot's gloved hands moved with surgical precision. In the laundry basket, a sodden tweed jacket, cuffs caked with mud. A single gardenia petal clung to the hem. Blackwood paled. "That's from yesterday. Rode out to the home farm before dinner." Poirot sniffed the mud. "This is clay, Colonel. The home farm is gravel. This clay is from the rosebed beside the conservatory." Blackwood's jaw worked. "I may have taken a turn in the garden after port. Needed air." Poirot noted it. Red herring or lie? The doctor's room was Spartan, medical journals, a bottle of laudanum, a leather case. Inside the case, the missing scalpel, wrapped in gauze stained with green sap. Thorne adjusted his spectacles. "I used it to prune a plant in the conservatory yesterday. For Lady Evelyn's nerves, aromatherapy." Poirot examined the blade. The cut on the wire was clean. "This blade is nicked, incompatible." But the sap matched the gardenia stem. Another thread. Geoffrey's chamber was chaos. Empty brandy bottles, crumpled racing forms, a woman's silk stocking draped over a chair. Geoffrey flushed. "Clara's. She left it after billiards." Poirot lifted the stocking. A run in the toe, ladder pattern matching the torn black lace. But the lace was mourning veil, not silk. Geoffrey laughed nervously. "I collect souvenirs, old boy." Poirot's eyes flicked to the window. Mud on the sill. Inside. "You opened this window last night." "Needed a smoke. Rain came in." The mud was dry. Impossible if opened during the storm. The American heiress's room was a riot of colour. Jazz records, Vogue magazines, a bottle of gardenia perfume, half empty. Miss Voss bit her lip. "I told you, I changed to rose after dinner. Someone took my gardenia bottle." Poirot opened the wardrobe. A black lace veil hung among the dresses. Intact, but beneath the bed, a wet footprint on the rug, small, bare, identical to the one in the hall. Miss Voss gasped. "I swear, I was in bed." Poirot knelt. The print was fresh. Someone had stood here after the murder. The widow's room was austere. Black bombazine, a prayer book, a locked trunk. Poirot produced a hairpin. Click, the lock yielded. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. The top one, in the same hand as the burned confession. Mrs. Langford's face was stone. "I wrote it, but I burned it yesterday. Someone stole it." Poirot unfolded another letter. A map of the manor, marked with a red X on the study chimney. The lady's chamber was dim, curtains drawn. On the dressing table, her pearl necklace, one bead missing. The broken thread matched the pearl in the study. Lady Evelyn whispered, "It broke at dinner. I thought I'd lost it in the drawing room." Poirot opened her wardrobe. A pair of muddied slippers, size 5 her size, but the mud was dry, cracked. "I walked in the rose garden yesterday afternoon," she said, "before the storm." Poirot examined the soles. A gardenia petal embedded in the tread. The glass house was a jungle of steam and scent. The trampled gardenia bush, the forced door. Poirot knelt in the mud. A cigarette butt, Turkish, gold-tipped, Geoffrey's brand. But beside it, a woman's heel print, deeper on the left, indicating weight carried. The dagger weighed nearly 2 pounds. Poirot measured. The print was Lady Evelyn's size, but the depth suggested a heavier person. Poirot led Hastings up the narrow servants' stairs. The attic was a graveyard of trunks and cobwebs. In one corner, a ventilation grate overlooking the study chimney, large enough for a slim person. Dust disturbed, a smudge of blood on the edge. Hastings. Someone came through the roof? Poirot. Or appeared to. Observe, the blood is dry, placed hours ago. A false clue. Planted. Back in the drawing room, Poirot laid out the findings like a card, sharp revealing a hand. We have. He picked up the key. But this is the true clue. Turned wrong. Only possible with a duplicate. He produced a wax impression from his pocket, taken from the study lock at dawn. Someone made this before the murder. We search for the duplicate. The group shifted uneasily. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. The killer is not merely clever. They are among us, planting herrings like a fisherman baits hooks. But Poirot, he smells the fish. He moved to the fireplace, pressed a panel, click. A hidden drawer slid open. Inside, a duplicate key, brass, newly cut. And a single gardenia petal pressed flat. Poirot held it up. From the killer's pocket. Careless. But whose pocket? He turned to the group. The net tightens. The red herrings swim in circles, but the shark is here. Outside, the rain intensified. A shutter banged. Somewhere, a door creaked. Poirot's eyes swept the room. The next move is theirs, but Poirot, he is ready. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The drawing-room clock struck 11 with a chime that felt like a gavel. Outside, the rain had turned vicious, horizontal sheets that lashed the windows and turned the gravel drive into a rushing stream. The manor was a ship adrift, cut off from the world by flooded lanes and severed telephone wires. Inside, the air crackled with a tension sharper than any storm. Hercule Poirot stood at the French doors, gazing into the chaos beyond the glass. The duplicate key lay on the table behind him like a loaded pistol. The pressed gardenia petal beside it had begun to brown at the edges, as if the flower itself were dying of guilt. The suspects sat frozen in their chairs, each nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. No one spoke. The silence was a living thing, coiling around throats. Poirot turned. His voice, when it came, was soft but carried the weight of a judge's verdict. Mes amis, the complications begin. The red herrings have served their purpose. They have muddied the waters, but now the water's clear, and the truth rises like a corpse from the depths. We have a duplicate key. We have a pressed petal. We have a killer who believes they have outwitted Poirot. They are wrong. He picked up the key. This was cut from a wax impression taken before the murder. The locksmith in Bishop Stortford is closed until Tuesday. Ergo, the impression was made here in this house within the last 48 hours. We will now discover who had access to the study key and when. Poirot produced a small tin from his pocket. Beeswax. I borrowed it from Mrs. Potts this morning. The kitchen uses it for sealing jars. The tin is half empty. Yesterday, it was full. He led the group to the kitchen. Mrs. Potts, flour-dusted and flustered, confirmed. Used it Friday for the chutney, sir. Tin was full then. Found it half gone this morning. Poirot opened the pantry. On the shelf, a perfect impression of the study key in the remaining wax, soft, made within hours. Hastings whistled. Someone used the kitchen while we slept. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement. And the pantry window was unlatched. The killer entered here after the staff retired. Back in the drawing room, Poirot gestured to the empty space on the dining room wall. One dagger is in Lord Harrington's back, but observe, he opened a cabinet, revealing a velvet-lined case. Inside, an identical dagger, its twin. Colonel Blackwood frowned. Reggie's matched set, from India. He kept one on the wall, one in the case. Poirot lifted the second dagger. The blade was clean, but the hilt bore a faint smear of green sap. Gardenia. Dr. Thorne leaned forward. That's from the conservatory. I treated a cut on Lady Evelyn's hand yesterday. She pricked it on a thorn. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn. You bled on the dagger? She shook her head, confused. "No, I bled on a rose. In the garden." The sap was gardenia, not rose. Poirot moved to the gramophone in the corner. A record lay on the turntable. The Blue Danube. The needle was at the end. "Lord Harrington hated waltzes," Mrs. Langford said. "He banned them after my husband's death, said they mocked grief." Poirot lifted the record. Beneath it, a wax cylinder, hand-cut. He placed it on the machine, cranked the handle. The recording ended in static. Geoffrey lunged. "That's impossible. Uncle was alone." Poirot stopped the machine. "No, the cylinder was cut before the murder. The killer forced him to record it, then played it back to establish time of death." He examined the cylinder. A fingerprint in blood, not Harrington's. A scream from the conservatory, Mrs. Potts. The group rushed in. On the tile floor, amid shattered pots, Dr. Thorne, unconscious, a gash on his temple. Blood pooled beneath his head. His medical bag open, vials smashed. Lady Evelyn knelt. "He's alive, pulse weak." Poirot examined the scene. A heavy brass orchid pot lay beside Thorne's head. The blow came from behind on the floor. A note typed, the typeface matched the anonymous letters. "Hastings, the killer's striking again." Poirot's face was grim. "No, this is a complication, a distraction. Observe, the wound is superficial. Thorne will live. The note is fresh, typed after we secured the study typewriter." He knelt. Beside Thorne's hand, a gardenia bloom crushed. Poirot gathered the group in the library. Thorne, bandaged and pale, sat propped with brandy. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you were attacked at 10:40. Where were you?" Thorne's voice was hoarse. Checking the conservatory door, Jenkins said it was forced. "Someone struck me from behind." Poirot turned to the others. "New alibis, from 10 o'clock onward." Colonel Blackwood. "In my room, cleaning my revolver. Heard the gramophone at 10:20. Mrs. Langford. "Library, writing. Heard the crash in the conservatory." Geoffrey. "Billiard room, alone, smoking." Miss Voss. "My room, packing, thinking of leaving." Lady Evelyn. "With Thorne in the conservatory till 10:30, then to bed." She nodded. "We argued. He wanted to sedate me. I left at 10:30. But Thorne said he was alone when struck." Poirot led Hastings to the attic. The ventilation grate. He pushed. It swung inward. A narrow passage, brick-lined, descending behind the walls. Cobwebs thick, but broken in a path. Hastings. "A secret way into the study." Poirot crawled through. The passage ended at a panel behind the study bookshelf. It opened with a click, but the panel was nailed shut from the study side. Fresh nails, hammer marks. Poirot. "The killer used this passage, then sealed it to create the locked room." He examined the nails. One was loose, pulled with pliers. Behind the panel, a gay drop of blood. Fresh. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The drawing-room had become a courtroom without walls. The storm outside had reached its crescendo. Thunder cracking like artillery. Lightning strobing through the tall windows in white-hot flashes that froze every face in stark relief. The fire in the hearth spat and hissed, throwing shadows that writhed across the ceiling like guilty souls. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the rug, the wax impression in one hand, the phonograph cylinder in the other. The suspects formed a ragged circle around him. Colonel Blackwood gripping the arms of his chair as if it were a trench parapet. Dr. Thorne pressing a blood-stained handkerchief to his bandaged temple. Geoffrey Harrington chain-smoking with trembling fingers. Miss Voss clutching a lace handkerchief to her mouth. Lady Evelyn staring glassily at nothing. Mrs. Langford rigid as a tombstone. Mrs. Potts revived and sobbing in Jenkins's arms. Poirot's voice cut through the storm like a scalpel. "Mesdames et messieurs, The hour of revelation has arrived. The little grey cells, they have spoken. The impossible crime is no longer impossible. The locked room was never locked. The confession was never live. The murder was never in the study. Everything was a performance, and the curtain falls now. He placed the wax impression on the table. The thumbprint was clear, ridged, unmistakable. Mrs. Potts, your print, but you are not the killer. You are the key, the unwitting accomplice. Someone stole your duplicate, used your wax, left your print to frame you. Who had access to the pantry after 10 p.m.? Mrs. Potts whimpered. Only the family, sir. The staff were abed. Poirot nodded. Précisément. The killer is family, or acts as family. He turned to the phonograph. Cranked it once. The cylinder spun. Lord Harrington's voice crackled again. Poirot stopped it. This was recorded yesterday afternoon. Note the background. Birds. The storm had not yet begun. Lord Harrington was alive at 4 p.m. He was dead by 11. He lifted the cylinder. The voice is Harrington's, but the words, they are too neat, too rehearsed. He was forced to read a script. Observe the pause after Blackwood struck the blow. A hesitation. He was threatened. Poirot moved to the body, still covered by the sheet. He lifted it. The dagger glinted. The blood had darkened to rust. Dr. Thorne, your examination at dawn. Rigor mortis? Thorne swallowed, beginning in the jaw, consistent with death between 10 and 11 p.m. Poirot shook his head. Non. Rigor begins in the small muscles, eyelids, jaw, within 2 to 4 hours, but observe the lividity. He turned the body slightly. The blood had pooled on the left side, not the back. Lord Harrington died on his side, not slumped over the desk. He was moved after death, but before lividity fixed. That is a window of 1 hour. He was killed elsewhere, dragged, posed. Poirot led the group to the conservatory. The air was thick with humidity and the cloying sweetness of dying blooms. Shattered pots still lay where Thorne had fallen. The gardenia bush was a ruin. Poirot knelt by the trampled earth. Here, the real murder. Observe the blood, spattered upward, not pooled. A thrust from behind while the victim bent to pick a flower. The dagger entered here. He indicated a spot between the shoulder blades and was withdrawn. The body fell forward. He pointed to drag marks in the mud, leading to the scullery door. From here, through the scullery, up the servants' stairs, into the attic passage, down to the study. The killer is strong, or had help. Back in the study, Poirot opened the hidden panel behind the bookshelf. The nails were pried loose. The passage yawned like a dark throat. The killer entered the study before the murder. Via this passage, they left the panel open. Lord Harrington was lured here at 11 p.m., with the forged note in the hollow key. He entered, saw the open panel, turned to investigate, stab, but the stab was not fatal. Poirot continued. The wound was deep but missed the heart. Harrington staggered, bleeding, into the conservatory, seeking help. The killer followed, finished him there. Then returned the body via the passage, inserted the dagger fully, locked the door with the duplicate, turned the key wrong to confuse, and exited through the scullery. He demonstrated with the duplicate key. The wrong turn, a deliberate error, to make us believe the lock was tampered with from outside. Poirot held up the cylinder. Recorded at 4 p.m. in the library. The killer held a gun or a knife to Harrington's throat. Read this, or die now. He read, then was locked in the study until 11, guarded. At 11, the killer returned, stabbed him, dragged him to the conservatory, finished him, staged the scene. He played the cylinder again. This time, he isolated a sound beneath the voice, a faint click. The killer's watch, a woman's watch. The click is at 4:03. The same watch was worn by—" He turned to Miss Voss. She froze. "Not you, mademoiselle. Your watch is American, no click, but someone borrowed it." Poirot produced the pressed petal from the hidden drawer. This was placed in the study after the body, to create a trail. But the petal is wilted. Gardenias wilt in heat. This one was near the fire, after the murder. He moved to the fireplace. The grate was cold, but the bricks were warm. The killer stood here, warming their hands, dropping the petal, careless. Poirot opened the safe again. The will was gone Hastings. When? Poirot smiled. "I removed it at dawn. The real will is in my pocket. The one in the safe was a forgery, signed by Thorn, but the ink is fresh. The real will leaves everything to Geoffrey, unless he predeceases his uncle, then to Charity." Geoffrey blanched. Uncle was cutting me out. Poirot. "No, he was protecting you. The forged will was planted to motive you." Poirot turned to the doctor. "You were not attacked. You staged it. The wound, self-inflicted with your own scalpel. The blood, your own smeared. The note, typed on the study machine after we left it locked." Thorn stood swaying. "You can't prove—" Poirot produced the scalpel from Thorn's bag. "Your blood. Type O. Lord Harrington was AB. The smear on the hilt. Your blood, planted to confuse." Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "The killer is not one person. It is two. A conspiracy. One to plan, one to execute." He turned to Mrs. Langford and Dr. Thorne. "You, Mrs. Langford, motive, the estate, revenge for your husband. You wrote the anonymous letters, stole the wax, forged the will. Dr. Thorne, motive, silence about the crime death, blackmail. You recorded the confession, staged your attack, planted the blood." Mrs. Langford laughed. "Harsh, brittle, absurd. I was in the library." Poirot held up her prayer book. A gardenia petal pressed between the pages. "You picked it in the conservatory at 10:50. Your veil, torn in the struggle. The lace matches the scrap." He turned to Thorne. "Your watch, clicks. You wore Miss Voss's perfume to confuse. You dragged the body. Your medical knowledge told you how to stage lividity." Poirot opened the attic passage. Inside, on the floor, a woman's shoe, Mrs. Langford's size, muddied, and a man's glove, Thorne's, monogrammed. The drag marks required two, one to pull, one to guide. You sealed the panel after to create the locked room. He produced the real will. "Lord Harrington changed it yesterday, to expose you both. He was going to confess publicly. You killed him to silence him." Mrs. Langford cracked. "He deserved it. He killed my husband with guilt. Thorne helped cover it. He knew." Thorne lunged for the revolver. Blackwood intercepted, wrestling him down. Poirot stood over them. The crime death was murder, but this murder was greed. You used the past to justify the present. The little grey cells, they see through the fog. Lightning flashed. Thunder roared. The revelation was complete. The killer, or killers, were unmasked. Chapter 7. Justice served. The storm had spent itself. By 2:00 in the afternoon, the sky had cracked open to a washed-out, watery blue, and the rain had dwindled to a polite drizzle that tapped the windows like a bailiff's gavel. Inside Shadowbrook Manor, the air was still thick, but no longer with thunder, only with the hush that follows revelation, the stunned silence of a house that has seen its ghosts named and shackled. Hercule Poirot stood at the study door, the duplicate key in one hand, the real will in the other. Behind him, Mrs. Beatrice Langford and Dr. Elias Thorne sat bound to mahogany dining chairs with silk bell-pulls. Colonel Blackwood's improvised handcuffs. Their faces were masks of defeat, hers carved from granite, his pale and twitching like a man watching his own autopsy. The other suspects stood in a loose semicircle, half in shock, half in relief. Lady Evelyn had finally accepted a sedative and was being supported by Miss Voss. Geoffrey Harrington had stopped smoking. The cigarette trembled unlit between his fingers. Hastings hovered at Poirot's elbow, notebook closed for the first time in hours, eyes wide with the awe of a schoolboy who has just seen the magician explain the trick. Poirot spoke quietly, but every word carried. Justice, mes amis, is not a thunderclap. It is a slow turning of the wheel. The crime is confessed. The mechanism is exposed. Now we secure the evidence, summon the authorities, and restore order to this house of secrets. He turned to Jenkins. The telephone lines. Still down, sir, but the floodwater is receding. The Bishop's Stortford constable should reach us within the hour. Poirot nodded. Bien. Until then, we preserve the scene. Poirot moved methodically, as if conducting an orchestra of silence. The body of Lord Reginald Harrington was recovered with the sheet, but Poirot lifted it once more to photograph the lividity with a small Kodak he had borrowed from Miss Voss. The dagger was removed, carefully with gloved hands, and wrapped in oilskin. The blood on the hilt was two-layered, Harrington's on the surface, Thorn's beneath. The typewriter ribbon was extracted. The last keystroke spelled the forged note found beside Thorn. The true murder site was cordoned with bell pulls strung between orchid stands. The spatter pattern was measured. High-velocity droplets on the glass ceiling, consistent with a downward thrust, while the victim bent forward. The drag marks were dusted with flour from the kitchen, revealing two sets of footprints. A woman's narrow heel, Mrs. Langford, and a man's broader shoe, Thorn. The hidden panel was photographed open. The loose nail was bagged. The woman's shoe, black leather, size 5, mud still damp, and Thorn's monogrammed glove were placed in separate envelopes, wrapped in cotton wool and sealed with wax. The faint click of Thorn's watch was isolated and noted. Returned to the safe, locked with Poirot's own padlock. The real will, leaving the estate to charity unless Geoffrey survived his uncle, was folded into Poirot's breast pocket. Poirot sat the prisoners at the dining table, a single lamp between them. Hastings took shorthand. Mrs. Langford spoke first, voice flat, as if reciting a liturgy she had rehearsed for years. It began with the letters. I typed them on Reginald's machine while he was out riding. I wanted him to sweat, to remember my husband, how he drank himself to death after the bunker, how Reginald let him take the blame. I stole the wax Thursday night, made the impression while Mrs. Potts slept. Thorn cut the key Friday morning in the village, said it was for the High wine cellar. She looked at Thorn with contempt. He was supposed to scare Reginald, force the confession. But Thorn panicked, stabbed him in the study. Reginald ran, bleeding, into the conservatory. I followed, finished it with the second dagger. Thorn dragged the body back. We staged the locked room. Thought we'd frame the past, make it look like suicide over guilt. Dr. Thorn's turn. His voice was a whisper, cracked with self-loathing. I covered the crime death in 17, falsified the autopsy. Reginald paid me for silence. When he decided to confess, publicly, to the papers, I knew I'd hang. I recorded him at gunpoint Friday afternoon. Locked him in the study till 11, stabbed him when he tried to escape. Mrs. Langford helped with the drag. I typed the note beside my body, to buy time. The blood on the scalpel, my own. I thought if I was a victim, no one would suspect. He laughed, a broken sound. "We even planted the gardenia trail. Thought it would lead to Clara. American, outsider, perfect scapegoat." Poirot addressed the room. "Mrs. Langford, revenge and greed. The forged will gave her everything." Dr. Thorne, self-preservation. Exposure meant ruin, perhaps the gallows. Together they weaponized the past. The crime-death became their smokescreen. Every red herring, the muddy jacket, the pearl, the footprint, was planted to point at innocence. He turned to the others, Colonel Blackwood. "Your jacket was muddied deliberately by Thorne, who borrowed it while you slept." At 2:47 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel. Inspector Japp strode in, soaked but triumphant, followed by 2 constables and a police surgeon. "Poirot, you old fox! The whole village is under water, but we waded through. What have you got?" Poirot handed over the evidence envelopes, the confessions, the photographs. A locked room that was never locked. A suicide that was double murder. 2 killers who thought the past could be buried with the present. Japp whistled. "Mrs. Langford, the doctor, blimey." In the library, with the fire rekindled, Poirot unfolded the real will before Geoffrey. "To my nephew Geoffrey Harrington, my entire estate, on condition that he establish a trust for the families of soldiers lost in the Great War, especially one Elias Crowe. Lady Evelyn receives a lifetime annuity. The staff, pensions for life." Geoffrey's eyes filled. "Uncle, he wasn't cutting me out. He was saving me." Lady Evelyn wept quietly. "He was going to confess, to free us all." Mrs. Langford and Dr. Thorne were led out in handcuffs. She did not look back. Thorne stumbled, muttering about laudanum and lies. As the police van splashed away down the drive, Poirot stood on the steps with Hastings. "The wheel turns, mon ami. Justice is slow, but it grinds fine." By dusk, the manor was transformed. Windows thrown open, fires lit in every grate. Mrs. Potts served tea in the drawing-room, real tea, not the cold dregs of suspicion. Geoffrey raised a cup. "To Uncle Reginald, and to Poirot." Miss Voss smiled for the first time in days. "And to the little grey cells." Poirot bowed. "They are modest, but they serve." That night, Poirot stood alone in the conservatory. The gardenia bush was pruned, the broken pots cleared. He placed a single white bloom on the spot where Lord Harrington had died. "Repose en paix," he murmured. "The crime-death is solved. The living may heal." Outside, the moon rose over Hertfordshire, silver and clean. The manor's shadows were only shadows now. Justice had been served, slowly, deliberately, and with the precision of a Belgian detective who never missed a clue. Chapter 8. Unravelling Threads. The sun had fully risen by 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, a pale, reluctant disk that painted the manor's wet stone the colour of old bone. The floodwaters had retreated, leaving the lawns littered with broken branches, and the air sharp with the scent of churned earth. Shadowbrook Manor looked smaller in daylight, less haunted, more merely tired, as if the house itself had stayed awake all night confessing. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He stood in the library, coat off, waistcoat unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A rare informality that signalled the final push. The long table was now a battlefield of evidence. Photographs pinned in sequence, string connecting clues like a spider's web. The phonograph cylinder spinning slowly under a magnifying glass. Hastings, bleary but determined, poured coffee from a silver pot. Poirot spoke without looking up. "Mon ami, the revelation is complete, but the threads they still dangle. Justice is served, yes, but understanding, that is the final luxury. We unravel the last knots before Japp returns with the van." He lifted the wax impression of the study key. "Thread 1, the duplicate. Mrs. Langford claims she made it Thursday night, but the wax was stolen Friday, after the staff had retired. Contradiction. Thread 1. The true timing of the duplicate key. Poirot led Hastings to the pantry. The beeswax tin was still half empty. He scraped a sample, held it to the light. This wax is soft. Beeswax hardens in cool air. The pantry is north-facing, cold, yet this impression is pliable, made within the last 6 hours. He opened the kitchen ledger. Mrs. Potts's neat hand. Friday 11:47 p.m. Checked pantry door. Locked. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mrs. Potts saw the thief. She thought it was a dream, laudanum, but the thief was Thorne. He entered at 11:50, made the impression, left the tin half empty to frame the cook. Mrs. Langford lied about Thursday. She only planned it then. Thread 2. The second dagger's journey. In the dining room, Poirot opened the velvet case. The clean dagger lay beside its bloodied twin. The wall dagger was removed Friday afternoon. Observant the dust outline, sharp, no disturbance until then. But the case, dagger has fingerprints, thorns, in gardenia sap. He handled it after the murder. Poirot reconstructed. Thorne took the wall dagger at 4 p.m. during the recording. Used it to threaten Harrington. Stabbed him in the study at 11:05. Withdrew it. Harrington fled to the conservatory. Mrs. Langford followed with the case dagger. Finished him. They swapped blades during the drag. Inserted the clean one into the body to confuse blood patterns. Thread 3. The phonograph's hidden track Poirot returned to the gramophone. He lifted the cylinder, revealed a second groove beneath the first. Faint, scratched. A palimpsest. Thorne recorded twice. First layer, the forced confession. Second layer, over it, a whisper, "Help me." Harrington's voice, barely audible. He was begging during the recording. Poirot played it at slow speed. The whisper emerged, "They'll kill me. Thorne, Beatrice." Hastings paled. He knew their names. Poirot nodded. He suspected. The anonymous letters. He recognized the typing. Mrs. Langford used his own machine, but the A key sticks. Every letter has a faint double strike. He confronted them Friday morning. They decided to silence him that night. Thread 4. The Gardenia Trail's true purpose Poirot took the group to the conservatory. The trampled bush. He knelt, lifted a single white petal, unblemished. This petal was placed on the drag path after the body passed. Observe, the mud is dry beneath it. The killer wanted us to follow the scent away from the scullery door. He pointed to the scullery tiles. Here, the real exit. Mud stops. But a drop of blood, Harrington's, on the threshold. The killer wiped the floor but missed this. They carried the dagger out, not in. Thread 5. The forged will's ink. In the study, Poirot opened the safe. The forged will lay beside the real one. He dabbed a corner with a chemical-soaked cloth. The ink changes colour, from black to purple, fresh, written Saturday morning, after the murder. Thorne forged it in the library while we searched the attic. Mrs. Langford distracted us with her fainting spell. He held up a pen from Thorne's pocket. The nib matches the will's flourish on the T in Thorne. Thread 6. The attack on Thorne. Reconstructed Poirot staged it in the conservatory. Hastings played Thorne. Thorne enters at 10:40, alone. He smashes the orchid pot himself. On the tile, not his head. The gash, superficial, scalpel, angled. He smears his own blood, types the note on the portable machine he carried in his bag, crushes the gardenia to release scent, then lies down. He demonstrated the pot's fall. Clang. The sound carries. Mrs. Langford screams from the kitchen. Timed. We rush in. Thorne revives slowly. Thread 7. The passage's ceiling. In the attic, Poirot pried the loose nail. Behind it, a scrap of black bombazine. Mrs. Langford's dress. She sealed the panel after the drag. But the nail was pre-loosened, Thorne's pliers' marks. They planned to discover the passage later, blame a secret intruder. Thread 8. The alibis, final cracks. Poirot gathered the suspects one last time. Mrs. Langford. Library at 11:15. But the library clock was stopped at 11:07 by Thorne to create a gap. Thorne. Conservatory at 10:40. But the portable typewriter was warm when we arrived, used minutes before. Geoffrey. Billiards at 11:02. But the cue chalk was wet. He was in the conservatory, saw the murder, fled in terror. Geoffrey confessed, voice breaking. I saw them drag him. Uncle was already dead. I ran. I'm a coward. Thread 9. The motive's final layer. Poirot opened a hidden drawer in Harrington's desk. Inside, a letter to the Times dated Friday. I confess to the murder of Sergeant Elias Crowe, 1917. I ordered it. Blackwood struck. Thorne covered. Langford protested. I have lived with this sin. Poirot. He mailed it Friday. The killers intercepted it at the village post office. Thorne bribed the postmistress. They knew exposure was imminent. Thread 10. The unravelling. Complete Poirot stood before the evidence board. The strings now formed a perfect web, centred on Mrs. Langford and Thorne. Every thread leads here. The duplicate key, Thorne's timing. The daggers, swapped. The recording, double-layered. The gardenia, misdirection. The will, forged post-mortem. The attack, staged. The passage, sealed after use. The alibis, cracked. The letter, intercepted. The motive, exposure. He turned to the prisoners. You thought the past would protect you. It condemned you. Mrs. Langford spat. He deserved it. Thorne wept silently. Poirot's voice was soft. No, no one deserves murder, only justice. He folded the evidence into a leather case. The threads are unravelled. The tapestry is whole. The crime death is closed, twice over. Outside, the police van returned. Japp stepped out, nodding approval. Poirot handed over the case. Toot it on order, Inspector. The little grey cells have spoken. As the prisoners were led away, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Shadowbrook Manor breathed, free at last of its ghosts. Chapter 9. The Final Deduction. The library clock struck 3 with a single solemn chime that echoed through the manor like the closing of a crypt. Sunlight now poured through the tall windows, gilding the dust motes that drifted above the evidence table. The storm was a memory. Only the puddles on the terrace and the sodden ivy bore witness to its fury. Shadowbrook Manor stood stripped of illusion, its secrets laid bare, its corridors no longer whispering, but silent, waiting for the final word. Hercule Poirot had dismissed everyone save Hastings and Inspector Japp. The prisoners, Mrs. Langford and Dr. Thorne, were locked in the wine cellar under constable guard, their wrists raw from silk ropes. The other suspects had been sent to their rooms with strict orders. Pack, rest, speak to no one. The house was a held breath. Poirot stood before the evidence board, a conductor facing his score one last time. Red string crisscrossed the photographs, documents, and objects like veins. At the centre, a single white gardenia bloom in a crystal vase, freshly cut from the conservatory, its petals still dewed. He spoke without turning. Monsieur, the unravelling is complete, but the final deduction, that is the crown. We have the how, we have the who, now we have the why, the motive that binds every thread into a noose. Japp lit a pipe, the smoke curling like incense. You've got them cold, Poirot. Confessions, footprints, the lot, what's left? Poirot's green eyes glittered. Precision, Inspector. The public wants drama. The law demands certainty. We give both. Poirot pinned a fresh sheet to the board. A hand-drawn clock face, marked in 5-minute intervals. Japp whistled. Like clockwork. Poirot tapped the clock face. Exactement. Every second accounted for. Poirot lifted the 2 daggers, now tagged. Wall dagger. Harrington's blood only. Withdrawal wound in conservatory. Case dagger. Harrington's blood on blade. Thorns on hilt. Inserted post-mortem in study. The swap was to confuse blood volume. A fresh stab bleeds profusely. A post-mortem insertion bleeds minimally. They wiped the wall dagger clean, planted Thorn's blood on the hilt to suggest 2 attackers. He held up a microscope slide. Under magnification. The case dagger's blood is clotted, dead 2 hours. The wall dagger's is fresh, withdrawn minutes after infliction. Poirot crushed the fresh bloom. The scent filled the room. Gardenias release maximum fragrance 6 hours after cutting. The petal in the study fireplace was wilted, but potent at 6 a.m., cut at midnight. The conservatory petal was fresh at discovery, cut at 11:15 p.m., dropped during the drag. The killer used the flower as a clock. By dawn, the study petal's scent would fade, proving it was placed after the murder. Poirot opened the attic panel. The loose nail glinted. The nail was filed halfway through, Thorn's dental tool. They wanted us to find the passage. But the blood smudge on the panel edge? Harrington's, from the drag. The second smudge, Thorn's, planted later with a cotton swab. They sealed the panel with temporary glue, dissolved by morning heat. The passage was meant to open under scrutiny. Mrs. Langford wrote Nafra 2 first, practice. Thorn wrote Nafra 1, final version. The real will was hidden in the library globe. Harrington's childhood hiding place, they never found it. He held up a magnifying glass. The T in Thorn crosses higher in the forgery. Nervous flourish. The real will's T is level. Poirot reconstructed the conservatory scene with chairs and a broom handle. Thorn enters at 10:40, smashes pot on tile. Sound carries. Cuts forehead with scalpel shallow. Types note on portable. Crushes gardenia. Lies down. Mrs. Langford screams from kitchen, exactly 10:43. We arrive. Thorn revives at 10:47. The blood pool under his head. 2 round. Poured, not flowed. The note, typed with left hand. Thorn is right-handed. The portable spacebar sticks. Matches the anonymous letters. Poirot pinned slips of paper. Mrs. Langford. Library, 11:15. But the library fire was cold, no heat to stop the clock. She stopped it manually. Thorn, conservatory, 10:40. But the portable typewriter's ribbon was new, changed that morning. Geoffrey, billiards, 11:00. But the cue ball had a blood speck. Harrington's. He witnessed the drag, fled, wiped the ball poorly. Poirot opened Harrington's desk drawer. A locket, inside a photograph of a young soldier, Elias Crowe. Crowe was Harrington's illegitimate son. The crime death was not theft, it was patricide. Harrington ordered the murder to hide the scandal. Thorn knew. Blackwood struck. Langford protested, then hanged himself in shame. Mrs. Langford discovered the locket Thursday. Her revenge was personal, not just for her husband, but for the boy her brother murdered. He held up a birth certificate, hidden in the locket's back. Elias Crowe, father, R. Harrington. Poirot produced Thorn's pocket watch. The crystal was cracked from the recording. During the 4 p.m. session, Harrington grabbed the watch, begging. The crack aligns with the click on the cylinder. The watch stopped at 4:03 p.m., exact time of the recording. Poirot stepped back. The board was complete. Mrs. Langford and Dr. Thorn planned murder Thursday. Intercepted the confession letter Friday. recorded Harrington at 4 p.m, staged the locked room from 11:05 to 11:25 p.m, used the passage, swapped daggers, planted gardenias as timers, forged the will, staged the attack, all to hide patricide. Every clue was dual purpose, to confuse and to confess. The wrong-turned key, a signature, the gardenia, a countdown, the passage, a red herring that became the truth. He turned to Japp. The case is airtight. No appeal, no doubt. Japp closed his notebook. You've done it again, Poirot. The Yard will hang them by Christmas. Poirot bowed. Justice does not hang. It restores. The boy Elias is avenged. The house is clean. He placed the gardenia bloom on the evidence table. Finn. The library fell silent. The final deduction was spoken. The wheel had turned its last revolution. Chapter 10. Justice in the Dawn. The first true light of Monday broke over Shadowbrook Manor at 5:58 a.m., a thin, cold blade of gold that slipped between the curtains and laid itself across the entrance hall like a verdict. The house was quiet but not empty. Every room still held the echo of footsteps, every corridor the memory of dragged weight. The storm was gone. Only the scent of wet earth and the faint perfume of gardenias remained. Hercule Poirot stood on the front steps, overcoat buttoned to the throat, hat in hand. Behind him, the great oak door stood open. Inspector Japp waited beside the police van, 2 constables flanking the prisoners, Mrs. Beatrice Langford and Dr. Elias Thorne. Their wrists were cuffed in steel now, not silk. Langford's black bombazine was torn at the hem. Thorne's spectacles were cracked, one lens spider-webbed. Neither looked back at the house. Poirot spoke to the dawn, his voice low but carrying. Justice in the dawn, it is fitting. The night hides crimes, the morning reveals them. The wheel has turned full circle. The crime-death of 1917 and the murder of 1925 are one case now, solved, sealed, delivered. The constables loaded the prisoners. Langford walked erect, chin high, but her eyes were dead. Thorne stumbled, muttering about laudanum and appeals. Japp slammed the van doors. Paperwork's done, Poirot. Confession signed. Evidence logged. The Yard's sending a car for you and Hastings at noon. You've earned a lie-in. Poirot smiled faintly. No, Inspector. The detective does not lie in. He ties up. There are loose threads, even at the end. He turned back into the hall. Hastings waited with 2 suitcases and a look of weary triumph. Poirot moved through the manor one last time, room by room, touching nothing, seeing everything. The study, the blood pool, had been photographed, measured, sampled. The desk blotter, removed, revealing a final note in Harrington's hand, pressed beneath the inkwell. If I die, look to Beatrice and Elias. The boy was mine. The typewriter ribbon, boxed, the sticking a key noted as signature. The conservatory, the gardenia bush was pruned into a neat sphere. The drag marks, cast in plaster, the dual footprints, woman's heel, man's brogue, preserved, the case dagger, cleaned, tagged, the swapped blood layers documented. The attic passage, the panel, propped open, the filed nail and bombazine scrap bagged. The blood smudge, swabbed, Harrington's type AB confirmed. The library, the real will, returned to the globe, now locked, the forged wills, side by side, the T-flourish magnified. The stopped clock, reset to 11:07, the exact minute of the fatal stab. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the Persian rug into a mosaic of gold and crimson. The suspects, now witnesses, stood in a semicircle. Lady Evelyn spoke first, voice steady for the first time. Monsieur Poirot, you've given Reginald peace, and me a future, the annuity. I'll use it to restore the rose garden in his memory. Geoffrey Harrington stepped forward, eyes red but clear. "The trust for the war families. I'll administer it myself. Uncle's last wish. And the estate, I'll keep it running. No more secrets." Miss Clara Voss smiled, the jazz-age sparkle returning. "I'm catching the Aquitania home next. Weak, but I'll wire the Times, the true story. Elias Crowe will have his name back." Colonel Blackwood saluted stiffly. "I struck the blow in 17. I'll face a court-martial if they want it. But I'll sleep tonight, first time in 8 years." Mrs. Potts curtsied, eyes wet. "The pantry key, new lock, sir. And the gardenias, I'll plant white ones only, for remembrance." Jenkins closed the door behind the staff. "The house is yours to lock, monsieur." Poirot sat at the desk, pen in hand, 3 envelopes. To the Director of Public Prosecutions, Case Summary, Regina V's Langford and Thorne. Enclosed, confessions, timelines, forensic reports. Recommend joint trial, murder and conspiracy. Sergeant Elias Crowe, deceased 1917. Evidence enclosed exonerates suicide ruling. Recommend posthumous honour and pension to next of kin. Mademoiselle, the locket is yours. Elias was your great-uncle, and Lord Harrington's son. Wear it with pride. The truth is your inheritance. He sealed them with red wax, the crest of Hercule Poirot. A simple P. Poirot, and Hastings walked the grounds. The rose garden was sodden but defiant, buds already swelling. The gravel crunched underfoot. Hastings spoke softly. "You know, Poirot, I thought the locked room would stump you." Poirot chuckled. "Mon cher, the locked room is never the puzzle. It is the key, and the key was always human. Greed, fear, love twisted into hate." They paused at the conservatory door. Poirot cut one last gardenia, placed it in his buttonhole. "For Elias Crowe, and for Reginald Harrington, 2 fathers, 1 son, 1 truth." At 11:55 a.m., the yard car arrived, a sleek black Daimler. Japp waved from the passenger seat. Poirot shook hands with Geoffrey. "The house is yours. Keep it open. Secrets thrive in the dark." Lady Evelyn pressed a small box into his hand. "Reginald's favourite tisane, for the journey." Miss Voss kissed his cheek. "You're a darling, monsieur. Come to New York, jazz and justice." The car pulled away. Shadowbrook Manor shrank in the rear window. Towers, ivy, chimneys, until it was only a silhouette against the sky. Whitehaven Mansions, 3 days later. Poirot sat by the fire, the gardenia in a crystal bud vase. The newspapers screamed headlines. Hastings read aloud, "They're calling you the Grey Cell Genius." Poirot sipped his tisane. "Bah! Genius is method, order, and a little sympathy for the human heart." He opened a final letter from the War Office. Sergeant Elias Crowe, posthumous Distinguished Conduct Medal, pension to next of kin, Miss Clara Voss. Poirot smiled. "Justice in the dawn. It is complete." He raised the cup. "To the little grey cells, and to the truth, which, like the dawn, always comes." Outside, London stirred. The Thames glinted. The world turned on. And in a quiet flat, a small Belgian detective closed the file on Shadowbrook Manor. Forever.